Hey guys, congratulations, you made it to the last set of notes for this semester. So today we're going to be talking about matter cycles, and more specifically we're going to be talking about carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So carbon cycle actually is cycled through interactions between living and non-living things. And there's different, it moves from the atmosphere in the air into the biosphere, which means into living things and things that support living things through photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So you may have heard of these terms before. Photosynthesis is when plants take carbon dioxide and water and you get glucose or sugar and oxygen. So when we take our carbon dioxide and water and turn it into sugar, that is photosynthesis. And then what happens, if you remember in grade 8, when the mitochondria that is present in almost all cells, when it takes the sugar and oxygen, it'll actually convert them into carbon dioxide and water and release energy. And that's actually how you get energy to do, your cells get energy to do everything. And that is called cellular respiration. So what's important here is we're moving our carbon from the atmosphere into the biosphere, and then we're taking it from the biosphere and we're releasing it back into the atmosphere. So it's going back and forth. Carbon also travels back to the atmosphere or the geosphere. The geosphere is the rocky ground when organisms die and decompose. Sometimes that can get trapped, and when it's trapped underneath sediment layers, it can actually form coal, oil, or gas that we use to make, we use and burn as fossil fuels. So here is a diagram that shows you how we use or how we move carbon stores. So we do have some carbon that's stored in our biomass, which is in living things. And this is in plants. This is also in animals. Remember, we are carbon-based. When we exhale, it's moved to the atmosphere. Photosynthesis brings it back in. Aquatic biomass also uses it. And then when the biomass, whether it's aquatic biomass or on Earth, what happens when they pass away and start to decompose, it releases it not only into the atmosphere, but it'll also release it into the lithosphere. So with aquatic, they'll sink to the bottom and you'll end up getting a carbon deposit on the bottom. If this gets trapped, we can form the coal, oil, and gas, which we have been tapping into and we've been burning, which has been releasing more carbon dioxide up into our atmosphere. This is dangerous. And the reason why this is dangerous is because we are releasing more carbon dioxide into the air than we typically would without burning of fossil fuels and other things. It takes millions of years for these to form. We are burning them at an increased rate. And what's happening is that carbon is actually reacting with things like water and causing issues. But not only that, but carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. So what happens is when we have extra carbon dioxide in the air, it traps the heat in the atmosphere, which is leading to global warming and global climate change. So what happens is, as we're increasing the temperature, there's three main things that happen with the warmer temperature. And by the way, it has been recorded that in the past 100 years, we've increased the temperature between half a degree and 0.9 of a degree, which this may seem really small, but it affects a lot of things. So when we have warmer temperatures, the main three things that happen, or main three concerns. The land and sea ice melts. The seawater becomes warmer. And we start to have more extreme weather events. So when the land and sea ice melts, the problem with this is that the sea levels rise, which means we get more flooding. And so not only is flooding bad because it puts people into danger, it destroys habitats, but it can also ruin water sources. Sometimes when we have bad enough flooding, we'll actually contaminate pure water or unsalted water with seawater, which makes it so that we can't drink it without processing it. Having warmer seawater may not sound so very dangerous, but not only does it affect the living things in the seawater, but it actually allows it to absorb more CO2. And when it absorbs more CO2, I'm going to show you this equation, but it actually makes it more acidic. And so when it's more acidic, that's when our coral reefs and other ecosystems are harmed. And then for extreme weather, you're going to have more frequent heat waves, and with more frequent heat waves, we're going to have human illnesses and fatalities that occur. So for the seawater absorbing more CO2, what happens is when you take water and you add carbon dioxide, it actually makes something called carbonic acid. That looks like this, H2CO3. And what happens is, this is how we have acid rain, and this is also what's destroying the coral reefs and shellfish. Being in the presence of carbonic acid can actually take a shellfish from a full shell to a minuscule amount of shell remaining in as little as 45 days. So not only does this destroy their habitat, but it also destroys their protection because their shell protects them from predators. So then next is our nitrogen. So nitrogen is a nutrient that we need for protein. It actually makes up quite a bit. And nitrogen is actually quite present in our air. It makes up about 78% of air. The problem is we can't use that form of it. So what we have is we have something called nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And nitrogen-fixing bacteria, which is present in soil and water, they take the nitrogen that's in the air and they turn it into forms that plants can use. Once plants can use them, animals eat those. Once the animal eats them, they use the nitrogen, and then actually in their excretions, so in their poop and in their pee, it's released back into the soil in the form of ammonium. But without that bacteria, we can't use it. So as you see here, we use it in amino acids, and bacteria in soil and root nodules will take it from the atmosphere, put it in the soil where we can use it. The plants will use it, then the animals will eat it. In the animal's waste, it'll go back into the earth, or when animals die, it'll go back into the earth. The problem with it is that we use nitrogen also in farming. So we use it not only in farming, but whenever we're growing plants. Nitrogen is found in many fertilizers. So not only when we have plants or forests that are being cleared and burning of fossil fuels, we're releasing nitrogen in the form of nitrogen oxide. And when we're burning trees and clearing the forest, we're actually releasing the nitrogen again. But when in agriculture, when we're using quite a few of the different fertilizers, we're actually putting in more nitrogen than the soil is supposed to have. So we have an excess of nitrogen, which sometimes through runoff, which means the water running from the field into another water source or into the groundwater, will actually contaminate the surrounding area with excess of nitrogen. What happens is when it gets into waterways, you can actually have an overgrowth of algae, which is called an algal bloom. And algal blooms actually happen up here quite often. Almost every summer we have a few lakes that have an algal bloom. But this might not just be from the nitrogen. As we go and talk about phosphorus, you'll find out that algal blooms are actually a result of too much phosphorus in water as well. So algal blooms are very dangerous because what happens is the algae covers the surface of the waterway. And what happens is that it blocks the sunlight from reaching the organisms in the deeper water. When it blocks the sunlight, that means they can't survive. And when they can't survive, they can't undergo photosynthesis, and you have a decrease of oxygen. You also have food sources that are running out, and it can actually do quite a bit of harm to any waterway. And the last one I wanted to talk about was phosphorus. So phosphorus, again, is an essential nutrient for growth and development of organisms, and it's usually found in the geosphere, so in the ground. And what happens is when rock is broken down through weathering, which means it wears away, the phosphorus is released into the soil and water. The plants then absorb this, and the animals obtain it by eating them. And decomposers, which are bacteria and other organisms which break down decaying organic material, so things that decompose bodies and organic material, they return the phosphorus to the soil and water as they break down the organism. So this is our main cycle for this one. It's found mainly in the geosphere. As it rains and it wears down the rock, it's released into the ocean. It tends to be put back into the ground, and this is the long-term cycle. This takes quite a while. For the short-term cycle, it's found in the ground, the animal or the plants absorb it, the animals eat the plants, the animals die, and it's returned back to the soil. So this one takes very little time, whereas the ocean side takes quite a bit longer. Again, phosphorus is found in dishwashing and laundry detergents and also in fertilizers. And when there's an excess of phosphorus that's run off into waterways, we end up with algal blooms. And these, again, can be very dangerous because you'll end up having many organisms that die. So this week's assignment you'll be able to find in the Google Drive. I'll try and make it really short.